So it's been a while since we've last had a discussion about suffering in gaming, and while I wait for the masochist delight known as XCOM 2 to come out next year, I guess it's been a little while since I've looked at the script too, for my dose of avoidable suffering, let's go back to where we left off and how a suffering avatar and player have an inherent disconnect. To review, the problem was that a gamer cannot experience real sacrifice as a result of his choices in games. This often leads to good actions in games feeling lacking, and that in turn causes playing the good moral path in games to feel lame despite a desire of most players to do so. So how can we allow players to experience the sacrifice that is necessary for good actions to have meaning? I pondered the question and have come up with what I think are two broad categories of types of solutions. One a few of you guys have already guessed, and the other one I alluded to at the end of my last video. So without further ado, let's get to it. Mechanical sacrifices! This solution that you clever folks guessed is the case where the game makes the game harder or causes the hero to have something taken away in response to choosing the morally good action, or it can cause the hero to lack something. In any event, the sacrifice causes a change in the game mechanics in a fashion that causes difficulty for the player. This can take a variety of forms: the sacrifice of payment for quests for a good cause, the foregoing of some power or benefit from not doing evil jobs. In some extreme cases, it can take the form of handicapping the player in some critical fashion. These kinds of imposed sacrifices are the most direct way a player can experience sacrifice because they affect the way the player interacts with the game. Options that the player may have had are no longer present, or ones that could have been made available will no longer be, all for the greater good. One really good example that I was reminded of by you guys was the game Baldur's Gate 2. In this RPG, your friend is imprisoned and threatened with death unless you walk through certain portals which decrease your stats. This happens very close to the final battle in the game, and you as the player know this. It was one of the few times I truly weighed the consequences of taking the good path in a game. I eventually did the right thing very reluctantly, and seriously considered the consequences to my character for doing this. It was a surreal experience weighing the different options and then feeling like scum for weighing those options. When done right, this type of gameplay modification can really add depth to decisions of a moral nature. The cost that the player might incur for doing the right thing adds weight to the choices the player can make. The struggle is real, yo! There are, however, a couple of very real dangers to this strategy. The first is that for a game developer, maintaining some balance in the difficulty becomes a potential nightmare. You can take away only so much before the game becomes wildly hard for your hero player. Likewise, balancing with a bias toward the good side can make the evil path stupid easy. Though in that case one could argue that this might be a point in the story and a larger overall point about morality. The second is that there's a real risk of emphasizing game elements to the point where moral evaluations are weighed against game mechanics. Too much emphasis tying choices to mechanics could result on the player being focused on how the game plays at the expense of the story. The result could have a real break in immersion, causing the game to feel more gamey rather than an integrated experience and defeat the point of the mechanic. Player investment in world crafting. Not a Minecraft reference. This solution involves drawing the player into the world and creating an emotional investment in the world the player is participating in. This is obviously a goal of a lot of story-driven games, but you'd be surprised how often the characters written in these games are little more than foils for the player to interact with. Players need to feel their choices matter to the world they engage in. The sacrifices that are made in-game by the player's character have to have significance in the world. If the sacrifices have little to no impact, they might as well not be there. I know this seems like it should be obvious, but if we stop and take a hard look at a lot of games, even ones that are heavily story-driven, don't spend enough time on characters that aren't the hero. Often they are little more than foils for the main player to interact with. There are notable exceptions, but it is a current weakness in games at the moment. We've been over a lot of the issues that hamper immersion in games, and this is one of the reasons why this is so important. Immersion feeds back into gameplay, and gameplay elements feed back into immersion. If the game allows you to make moral choices, yet those choices have little impact, then they're pointless choices, and gamers can smell a pointless choice a mile away. In order for those choices to have meaning, the characters in the game need to be fleshed out. They need to have their own lives and goals and desires in life, and the actions that the player can take need to have a real impact on the world itself. Because here's the thing about moral choices in games. Moral choices, as we said, have to have an object of focus, and the object of that focus must be defined enough to be believable. Flat characters, incoherent worlds, and thematic inconsistencies all undermine the investment the player has put into a game, and that causes the choices to be devalued as well. Moral choices in games are only as strong as the context of the game that they take place in. Simulated morality is a shadow of real morality, and when that isn't even fully realized, moral choices in games become little more than bland choices. So in order for moral choices to be realized, the morality of the game universe must be defined in such a way for moral choices to be consistent and have weight. In the future, we will look at some games where the world's definition of morality is hit or miss at best. We will dive into the game's lore in a bit more detail. But for now, it's enough to know that such goals should be pursued in order for moral choices in games to have meaning. That's all for now. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.